When a dishonest anti-Trump judge insulted Karoline Leavitt in court, he believed he was untouchable. However, when she retaliated, the entire courtroom fell silent. That day, in a stuffy federal courtroom, everything began as usual until Judge Maxwell Carter took the bench, his face flushed with rage, and there was no coffee in the room. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the latest stories. Maxwell Carter, a well-known Trump critic, was ready to hear a case involving the Faith and Family Foundation, a conservative charity accused of financial fraud. He is known for being harsh, especially toward anyone associated with the conservative side, and today he was in the courtroom. He barked at the clerk, startling the young woman and telling them, "2 more minutes. If you're not here, I'll hold them in contempt." The clerk, obviously in no mood, timidly announced that Press Secretary Leavitt had come to testify. Maxwell Carter's face darkened, saying, "Oh, how special." He sneered, not bothering to hide his contempt, telling her that her title meant nothing and that this was not the White House. Karoline Leavitt entered with a thick stack of documents in her hands, confident and sharp, and she nodded to the court staff, but Maxwell Carter glared at her. Miss Karoline stood tall in the middle of the courtroom, her gaze unwavering despite Judge Maxwell Carter's haughty declaration that he was the law. She gave a slight smirk that was a mix of confidence and defiance, then replied, "Understood, sir, but the law isn't something you can twist with Maxwell." He tapped his fingers impatiently on the desk like a hawk, and let me make this clear. He growled. The courtroom was filled with whispers as a man in the back row whispered to his neighbor, "She's got guts." A few spectators snickered, but Leavitt didn't care. Carter froze his hands mid-desk, his face turning beet red as if he were about to explode. "You dare lecture me about the law in my courtroom, you Zieggenump." Numb, awed, his voice dripping with sand, and pointed a trembling finger at her. "I'm not here to lecture you, Your Honor. I'm here to testify to the truth about something you seem unwilling to hear." Maxwell Carter slammed his gavel hard, drowning out all other noise and silence. He shouted, eyes blazing, "You're not a lawyer, not a court official, what, just—" She stepped forward, holding up a thick stack of documents. "I have a say when justice is at stake, sir. This case involves the Faith and Family Foundation, a charity that our administration supports. I have proof of their financial transparency, and you need to see it." Maxwell Carter smirked mockingly, leaning forward, but she didn't flinch. She looked directly at him and spoke in a calm yet powerful tone. His voice was shrill. "I know this Gumrichich conservative is hiding money behind Lee. Amil waste me time. Waste fairy tales, Miss Liv." He sat back in his chair as if he had heard a bad joke about evidence and charity. She opened her documents, flipped to the first, and read aloud. March 15, 2024, the Faith and Family Foundation met with donors in every contribution was publicly recorded in Manchester, New Hampshire, and Maxwell Carter abruptly stopped her by slamming the gavel again. He yelled, "Face flushed, I don't need—" to hear that nonsense list, but Leavitt didn't stop. She raised her head, her eyes as sharp as knives, and continued, including an independent audit. The courtroom fell silent, and the young clerk next to the desk squirmed in her seat as if she was afraid of collateral damage. Maxwell Carter gritted his teeth and gripped the gavel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. "You're crossing the line, Leavitt," he said, in a snarling voice that was shaking with rage. "One more word, and I'll hold you in contempt right now," he said. With a small but defiant shrug, he said, "If you want to put me in jail for speaking the truth, then by all means, but I won't remain silent while you try to bury Justice Maxwell." Carter jumped up from his chair and pointed directly at her, breathing heavily. "Justice, you dare to tell me nothing about me is known to you?" In her law, and he repeatedly banged the gavel, the sound echoing. The defense attorney, a young woman standing next to Leavitt, spoke up saying, "Your Honor, we just want to establish context." His eyes darted to the documents in Leavitt's hands, but they flickered uneasily. She smiled faintly and said, "I don't need to lecture, Your Honor. They speak for themselves." Maxwell Carter interrupted her with a thunderous voice. "Context?" Text to voice. "Context? They don't understand the context of the financial fraud case, not a charity event." "Shut up or you'll be held in contempt," slammed the gavel. The time the sound was weaker, as if his control was eroding. "If you would rather not hear it, continue. After talking about faith and beauty, let's move on to the Liberty Fund. Does that name sound familiar to you, Your Honor? May Your Honor raised his hand in mid-air with the gavel, his face instantly turning pale and his eyes blinking quickly, as if she had struck a nerve. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice falling to a near whisper. And then her head tilted, locking eyes with him sharply. As the courtroom erupted in murmurs, Maxwell Carter slammed the gavel harder than ever, almost snapping its handle. As others raised their phones to record, he screamed, his voice cracking, slowly repeating each word. "You know the group that funneled money into your offshore account." Oddly, the courtroom was filled with rulings against conservative defendants. She held up a sheet of paper, her voice calm but sharp, and she said, "This is a bank statement with a signature, a Honor signature, and a counter-signature, March 16th, 2024, one day after the Liberty Fund." Her hands were shaking, and she said, "You have no right to make baseless accusations in my courtroom." But the panic in his eyes was obvious. Sweat trickled down his forehead, and his breathing was labored as if he were choking. When a $100,000 meeting appears in your Cayman account, how do you explain Maxwell Carter's quick, blinking, awkward hand fumbling through his untidy hair and eyes darting as if he was looking for a fake? His stutter trembled. Stutter trembled. "You'd under and dare me?" "Undertake, you pay for this," he said. Maxwell Carter didn't respond immediately. Instead, he sank back into his chair and gripped the edge of the desk, staring at the paper as if it were a death sentence. "I see. Do you dare deny it?" she said, flipping another page and reading aloud. "April 20th, another $50,000 from SourceMe Swawant's to Quant." Maxwell Carter took a deep breath in an attempt to keep his cool. Judge Maxwell Carter sank back into his chair, gripping the edge of the desk, his wild eyes fixed on Karoline Leavitt as she challenged him. "You have no proof. This is a Trump circus to ruin me." He pointed at Leavitt's trembling hand and said, "You're crying." Leavitt just gave him a smile, and her eyes showed regretting it. "Deny! I don't need to deny anything!" he roared, his voice breaking with rage. Her words were like a razor-sharp blade, slicing through his already crumbling authority. The courtroom fell silent for a moment, only broken by Carter's heavy breathing. He took a deep breath to steady himself, then shot up, pointing at Leavitt with a shaking finger. She flipped another page in her stack and read aloud, "Where did you get that trash paper? I'll sue for defamation. I'll sue it. Issuation," Levi's Levy fixed on Carter, and she countered calmly but sharply, "This isn't just talk. It's evidence. Oh no. This is talk, state talk, dense." How do you explain that the courtroom exploded in whispers? A woman in the back whispered, "Oh my God, is that real?" as others raised their phones and flashed non-stop. Maxwell Carter slammed his gavel hard, but the bang failed to drown out the noise, and he yelled, "Faith and family will be handled as planned." In my courtroom, the young woman behind the desk kept her head down and trembled over her papers, too afraid to look up. She smirked coldly and held up another forged sheet. Then why? Forged with rage. It's heated. Why sheet? Sent why? Emails, and this is a Trump plot to destroy me. Maxwell Carter stumbled, clutching his chair for balance, and yelled, "This is my courtroom, and I won't let a political puppet turn it into a circus," he said. "Does this email come from your official address, Your Honor?" "Why does it match a $75,000 deposit to your Cayman account that same day?" she asked, tilting her head and eyes like daggers. He stepped closer, her voice echoing through the room, and he said, "For the room, you don't have the room to forbid the forgiver honor. Let me tell you about the Thompson case from last month." He said, "I forbid you to say another word. To say another word, I forbid you. You've given it one more, and I forbid you. You dragged it out." But his voice had lost its certainty as his eyes shifted to the documents in her hands. Reading aloud, a small business owner lost everything because you wouldn't look at his charity evidence. In this case, 2 days later, you received a 000 boost from the 80,000 Dwai Fund. You conceived thousands filled with chatter as a man yelled corruption in the open while phones continued to record. Maxwell Carter yelled over, "Enough! Enough! Enough!" The court staff nearby and said, "Get her out of here!" They exchanged hesitant looks, but none of them moved. One of them then shook his head, seemingly losing faith in Carter. Carter spun back, his face going pale, and pointed at Liv. "You think you're clever, don't you? You and Trump will pay for committing crimes, becoming a flame. This is a bank statement from May 20, coming after the case. You sealed all the documents immediately after meeting with the Liberty Fund, and the following day, $150,000 appeared in your account. What do you call a job bonus?" She held up another sheet and it said, "It's clever, snore, no." "Your sheet," Brandit said, "It's clever, snore, snow." Carter's terrified face was illuminated by flashes from the audience as the courtroom buzzed once more. Instead of the gavels screaming, "You have no fake. It's Alpha Q. I'll sue Trump and a fuck you." Al-Holy Trump and Suim Trumpeter pounded the desk with both hands. Sweat trickled down his brow, and his breathing was labored as if he were choking. He turned to the defense lawyer, who had been silent up until this point. "She can't do this." The lawyer's voice was shaky, and the discovery was discovered during discovery. "You can't stop her." Discovered a wild look. "What do you want?" he said, slamming the desk once more. With a cold smile, Leavitt said, "You don't know who you're messing with, little girl." Her voice sounded like a verdict. "No, Your Honor, you don't know who you're messing with." She held up the stack of documents, saying, "This isn't just about faith and family. It's a string of case-twisted money, you liberty, you money grubber, you twisted money, you liberty, liberty, money, you room." Judge to a suffocating peak as Judge Maxwell. Car Judge stood there, his hands shaking as he gripped the edge of the desk, his wild eyes scanning the courtroom. Karoline Leavitt. It held the documents aloft. We credit Karoline Leavitt. Or will you confess now? Reading. Orta didn't respond. He confessed, air wiping his. Carter wasn't acting as if he was looking for an escape. The audience held its breath and the phones recorded continuously. Carter took a deep breath to try to steady himself before yelling, "Shut up! I won't let you ruin me!" His voice cracked almost pleadingly as he slammed his hands on the desk, rattling the papers, and the courtroom fell silent. "Want me to continue reading, or will you confess now?" she asked, her words like a ticking bomb, shattering the last of his dwindling authority. She She pulled a small device out of her pocket and held it up, saying, "This is a recording from your office. Want to hear your voice without waiting for a reply?" She budged her gaze to Carter, who was cold and determined to ruin her. She said, "No, Your Honor. You ruined yourself when you said no, you sold out justice." She pressed play, and Carter's voice came through. "Wipe out all the faithfuls and families. I don't want them in." Faithfuls and family files and family it, she sobbed between gasps, saying he'd ruin my career if I didn't. The courtroom erupted as a man in the back shouted, "Oh my God, no way!" as phones recorded non-stop. The clerk, the young woman by the desk, broke down in tears, covering her face. A woman was standing there screaming about blatant corruption, and Maxwell Carter's eyes went wide with horror. He shrieked, "Stop it! Turn it off!" and lunged across the desk to get the device from Leavitt, but she quickly stepped back, keeping it out of reach. He stumbled and fell to the ground, strewing papers all over the place and laughing, erupted from the audience, accompanied by irate jeers. Carter's hair was a mess, and Rob's skewed appearance made him look nothing like a federal judge. He screamed, pointing a shaky finger at Levi and saying, "You made it up." Its fingers and eyes were fixed on him, and she asked in an icy voice, "Why are you?" She held out the paperwork and flipped through another page. "But I'm afraid you can't, because this is security footage taken from your office on July 10th at 11 p.m. Carter didn't respond. Instead, he panted and wiped his face, sweating as if he had been soaked. Then, using all of his remaining effort, he did the unimaginable and ran for the back door of his private chambers, as if he was trying to escape. "I can't handle this." The courtroom went into chaos as he yelled, his voice breaking, but two court officers quickly blocked the exit, saying, "Sir, you can't leave." One of them said firmly. Carter spun around, face pale, saying, "You're betraying me, all of you." He flailed wildly like a cornered animal, and some spectators jumped up, clapping, while others booed. One man yelled, "Serve me." Maxwell Carter stumbled back to the bench, slamming his hands down as the phones continued to record, but the gavel from his earlier outburst was gone, lying on the floor. It was a setup. He screamed, "I'm Orge, you can't touch me," and Trump framed him. "I'm here," and she said, "The truth, it can't escape." She flipped another, the truth, the crying, and Rose was pointing at Carter as he read aloud the page from your August 5th email to the Liberty Fund. "The next case will require additional support, so make sure the money is received on time." However, Carter stumbled, clutching his chair, his eyes darting for a phony exit, and his voice was forced. "She forced me to do it all," she sobbed, washed and forced, to force delete the files. "I didn't want to, but I was afraid that confession was the last." He roared, "Shut up!" Pointing at Carter, slammed the desk one last time, his hands shaking so hard that he almost tipped the chair. "Traitor, the traitor in you," he said, his threat only rev. "Traitor, traitor!" Then he spun back to Liv, screaming, "No, what's up, TPT? Now what more do you want?" Wasn't Light screaming now, "What's up?" That's up there, real powerful. "I want justice, Your Honor, and you're nowhere." I'll board, but he didn't finish, so he raised the recorder again. His finger hovered over the play button, asking if I should play another clip or let the FBI handle it. For a brief moment, the courtroom was silent. Only the clerk's sobs and Carter's panting filled the stifling air. He took a deep breath, trying to roar at you, but his voice broke, pleading in his trembling voice. Fingers at Librox were steady and cold. She said, "You're wrong, Your Honor. I do everything to protect justice." She hit play again, and another recording of Carter's clear, low voice on a thanks all played. Thanks, Liberty Fund. The monies in Faith and Family would be a prol played. The courtroom exploded. A man in the back yelled, "Wow!" as the phones had a problem. The courtroom clerk, who was still crying, leaped up and pointed at Carter. "That's true," she cried, in between gasps. "He made that call directly in front of me," and Carter sprang forward, reaching over the desk to grab the device and turn it
off. He then screamed, but he stumbled over the chair and fell again, spilling a glass of water on the floor as the audience erupted in laughter and yelled angrily.
He crawled up in his robes, his hair soaked and plastered to his forehead, and there was no sign of a federal judge. He yelled, pointing a shaky finger at Leavitt, saying, "You and Trump set this up and I'll kill you all." He stood firm, eyes never leaving him phony, she said. "I'll tell like all. He. Furthermore, he stood. "Why are you so scared?" Leaving up her phone and playing security footage of Carter in his office, she said, "Money's on time. I'll handle the next case as planned." The audience erupted once more as the unmistakable image of Carter's terrified face flashed on the small
screen, and a woman yelled, "Arrest him now!" "You got nothing," Carter yelled, papers flying everywhere like rain, and staggered, red, hands clinging to the desk with vacant eyes as if he had just staggered and lost.
But with his last remaining strength, he did something nobody saw coming. He lunged across the table, grabbed the documents from Leavitt's hands, and tore them apart in front of everyone. You see, the act only made him appear more desperate. She stepped back, her gaze icy, and she said, "You just dug your grave, Your Honor." She said, "Down, down, I have copies and the FBI grave." Ter froze, panting heavily, and looked around, seeing the disdain in the eyes of the audience and the eerie silence from the court. His voice broke as he whispered, "Staff Leavitt, Unsha resolve SLU catechism dome." These words were overpowered by the sound of taser swinging open, and an FBI team marched in, led by a tall agent wearing a badge that glinted under the lights, Judge Maxwell. The courtroom erupted in thunderous applause mixed with excited shouts as the agent said, "We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of corruption, abuse of power, and destruction of evidence." Carter spun corruption, use of power. "You can't do this. Immunity, unity, I have connections." The agent ignored him, signaling two others to approach with their handcuffs, while others gloated. He attempted to run for the back door once more, but two police officers stopped
him. "Escape, escape, You're not going to escape, the lead FBI agent said, then put his hand on Carter's arm and said, voice low, and said, "Exactly who you are, Your Honor. And we also know about the Liberty Fund, your offshore
accounts, and what you did with the Faith and Family Foundation." The cold ended today. With a sharp click, the handcuffs snapped around Carter's wrists, causing him to stop struggling and bow his head like a man who had lost everything. The audience erupted with some standing and applauding, while others shouted that justice had been served. A man then raised his phone and yelled, recording the clerk's tears as she turned to the agent, who was shaking, and said, "I'll tell you everything. He forced me to do it all." The agent nodded and gestured for Leavitt stepped back, arms crossed, and her eyes were fixed on Carter as he was led down the aisle. He looked up one last time, glaring at her with hatred, and he whispered in a shaky voice, "There'll always be someone to replace me." She tilted her head in response, saying with unwavering confidence, "No justiwo, won, and you lost because of yourself. yourself." Carter said, "No more." The FBI agents, Judge Maxwell Carter, down the courtroom aisle, his soaked robe and disheveled hair plastered to his forehead. He kept his head down and shoulders slumped like a man who had lost everything, but a flicker of resentment flashed in his eyes as he looked at Karoline Leavitt. The courtroom echoed with applause and jeers as the agents escorted him out. With the audience blending into a symphony of triumph, a man in the back row yelled, "Put him in jail now!" as phone flashes continued to pop, documenting the fall of the man who had once called himself the law. Carter stopped in the middle of turning to light one last time, thinking, "You've won, little girl," whispered in a trembling but venomous voice. "There'll always be someone to replace me."
"You won't change a thing." Carter opened his mouth to respond, but an agent grabbed his arm and cut him off. The agent growled, and Carter was dragged away helplessly as the audience erupted. "Your Honor," she said, in a voice that was cold but
powerful. "Justice won, and you lost because of what you did to Fidon's family and other innocent people." Once more, a crowd stood and applauded as a woman yelled, "He got what he deserved." The handcuffs shook as Carter was released, and the door slammed behind him, signaling the end of an untouchable figure's rule. Leavitt turned to the lead agent and gave her the last copy of her documents, saying, "Here's everything I've got. Statements and video CDOs, and you too. I trust you them. To remove the remaining items, the agent nodded and took them with a look of approval. "Thank you, Miss Leavitt, you've gone above and beyond what we could have imagined." The agent then turned to his team and signaled to seal off Carter's den, saying, "We need everything, including files, hard drives, and anything connected to the Liberty Fund." A young agent then stepped up and held an old cardboard box that had been discovered beneath the desk. The lead agent raised an eyebrow and turned to Leavitt, saying, "You're Carter. It's not just Carter. There's a whole network behind this, Leave." He opened it and revealed a cache of classified documents, including a list of 7 other judges, each of whose names was paired with dates and amounts from the Liberty Fund, all connected to cases against conservative organizations or individuals. The agent nodded with a rare smile, saying, "We need you as a witness for the big investigation. This is just the start. Leave it." Nodded without hesitation. "I'm in response to my suspicions." "Voice low," she said, "if there are. More like him out there. I'll help you find them." The courtroom fell silent, but the excitement of the defense was still palpable. The lawyer, the young woman who had supported Liv from the beginning, came up to the audience with a voice trembling with emotion. "You saved the Faith and Family Foundation, and not just them. You made history today." Leavitt turned, she said, her eyes softening slightly. "We just restored justice, so this is a win for everyone." Carter trampled the lawyer, who smiled and nodded. "But you were wonderful." The clerk turned to the agent, trembling, and said, "I'll tell you everything." The older man stood, clapping, slowly, and others joined in the applause that spread throughout the room. "He forced me to destroy evidence and threatened me for months." The agent took careful notes, nodding and saying, "You did the right thing by speaking up. We'll protect you." She stood at the center with her arms crossed, looking over the crowd, the court employees, and the mess of papers on the judge's desk. A small smile, not one of smugness but of satisfaction that she had done the right thing, appeared on her lips as she picked up the recorder, put it in her pocket, and turned to face the agent. "If you find any additional evidence of this network, please let me know." As the agents continued their search, a sheet fell from the file box. Carter sent an email to the Liberty Fund stating that they needed more support for the next case. The young agent held it up, quickly scanned it, and gave it to his boss. It appears that he wasn't acting alone. "Voice firm? I want to see them all pay." The agent nodded. "We'll be in touch." "You've opened a door no one dared touch." Looking at Elle, her eyes gleamed with the thought of what lay ahead. Carter might be in handcuffs, but the list of 7 other judges in the FBI's hands indicated that this fight was far from over. She stepped away from the witness stand, her gaze steady, as if prepared for the next battle, but the audience continued to watch. Maxwell Carter, who once referred to himself as the law, was now sitting in handcuffs, his authority vanishing like smoke, and Leavitt, whom he dubbed a political puppet, had become his final nightmare. The defense attorney, the young woman next to Leavitt, stepped forward, but the sound of clapping didn't linger for praise, because she knew that today's justice wasn't just for faith and family. It was the beginning of overthrowing a corrupt system. She said, "This is a win for everyone." Her voice was shaking with emotion. "You just saved the Faith in Family Foundation. This case is over. Leave it gently. It's not just them." She looked at the FBI agents leading the search of Carter's desk. She saw pieces of paper he had torn lying on the floor, but the secret stash, the list of 7 other judges which now sat in the FBI's hands, opening the door to a larger investigation. A few minutes later, an older man with a stern face was called in as a temporary judge, and he swiftly went over the evidence that Carter had attempted to bury the independent audit records of the Faith and Family Foundations. After a brief pause, he slammed the gavel, declaring that the fraud charges case was dismissed. The charity's representative, an elderly man with silver hair, approached Leavitt with tears streaming down his cheeks and said, "You saved us." Leavitt's voice choked, and he put a hand on his shoulder and replied, "I just did what was right." Meanwhile, news spread like wildfire outside the courtroom, where a crowd of reporters had gathered, microphones raised and cameras raised. A reporter shouted over the commotion, "Miss Leavitt, what can you say about Carter's arrest?" As Leavitt stepped out of the main doors, she paused, looking directly into the camera, her voice clear and steely, and said, "Today we proved no one-on-one is above the law, not even a judge." Maxwell Carter misused his position of authority by taking dirty money from the Liberty Fund to target the innocent and perverts for his benefit. Her words ignited a fire on XS #Justice for All and #Leavitt, and Carter shot to the top of the trends in less than 30 minutes. One user wrote, "Karoline Leavitt just took down a corrupt judge in court. This is Ginaire." Another posted Carter's work, but how many more like him are there? Videos of Carter being cuffed and tearing up papers went viral, garnering millions of views in a matter of hours. Comments poured in, saying that Trump had chosen the right person. Inside the courtroom, FBI agents continued to search Carter's office, and a young agent brought out another box of files, opening it for the lead agent. He also said that the list of 7 other judges all took Liberty Fund. Carter, the lead agent, nodded and glanced at Leavitt from a distance. She opened a larger door than we realized, and he muttered, "Seal it all." Ween ordered that we look into every single piece of corruption news that spread, trembling the legal system outside the crowd. Thanks, Karoline. While others chanted "Justice for the people," an amateur filmmaker shared a video of Leavitt leaving the courthouse with the caption, "Justice beat corruption." It quickly received hundreds of thousands of likes, and major news outlets jumped in. Fox News was among the first to report on the White House press secretary exposing a corrupt judge. They all had different opinions, but they all agreed that Liv made history in the courtroom when she sat with an agent and revealed details. He had threatened her for months, and she sobbed, "I didn't want to provide evidence, but he said he'd ruin me if I didn't." The agent took thorough notes, telling her that she did the right thing by speaking up and that we would protect her. Her testimony became a crucial component supporting the case, opposing Carter and opening the door for a more thorough investigation into his network on X. The public's response was tremendous. One user wrote from California, "Leavitt is the icon we need," while another shared a network that was completely corrupted because of her. Keep going. Leavitt for Justice climbed, along with memes of Carter and handcuffs from Justice. She didn't just defeat Carter, she was targeting the entire system. The crowd outside wouldn't move when an older man with a megaphone yelled, "This is the people's victory!" As she got to her car, she gave one final statement before she left. "Today was the first step, and we won't stop until every corrupt player pays." That quote went viral on all platforms. As the car drove Karoline away from the courthouse, the noise of the crowd and media vanished into the still night. She sat in the back seat, her hands still holding the copies of the documents listing 7 other judges connected to the Liberty Fund, her phone blaring with X. This solidified her reputation as a public figure of justice and tenacity. Leavitt pushed the door open, her heels clicking on the hardwood, and her husband, a quiet business, with a kind smile, held their 8-month-old son in the living room. "You're back," he said, eyes shining with pride as he saw her. She didn't check yet, but instead took a deep breath, allowing today's victory to sink in with a mixture of relief and resolve. "Mommy did the right thing for this country today," she whispered, kissing his forehead. Her husband stepped closer, resting a hand on her shoulder. "I saw the news and you made me so proud, my Gen Z girl," she said, embracing Leavitt tightly. The scent of formula and his warmth pulled me back from the storm I just faced. Her eyes sparkled as she said, "Thank you for the first laugh of the day." Her husband nodded, his gaze serious but trusting. "I know, and I know you won't stop." She met his eyes, which were flaring, and then she sat there. "Son, injustice doesn't come easy, but today we won." It had received tens of thousands of likes and comments pouring in. "You're our hero. Keep fighting." One reader from Florida thanked you for standing up for the truth. She opened her phone and saw her post. The post created an instant surge, hashing "Leavitt for Justice" higher and spreading like an unstoppable flame. The story of Karoline Leavitt battling Judge Maxwell Carter reflects a grim reality in the US today. Political polarization and corruption in the justice system are undermining public trust. Step 1, thank you all for your support. Let's keep moving forward together until justice is fully restored. In 2025 America, when political scandals dominate headlines, a judge used funds from the Liberty Fund to sway justice from the Faith and Family Foundation to the Thompson case. A young press secretary used concrete evidence, such as bank statements,
Emails and security footage to remove him, demonstrating the strength of truth in capable hands.
Today, Carter's journey from frantically destroying documents to being placed in handcuffs by the FBI serves as a reminder that no one is untouchable, and the lesson she learned from her use of X to emphasize her point that justice is difficult to achieve applies to modern-day America. Don't be afraid of the strong. They will gather information like she did with the list of 7 judges and use platforms like X to rally a community. Her actions didn't just save Faith and her family, they also started a larger investigation demonstrating that one determined individual can upend a system in today's world. If you want to continue following this fight to expose corruption and defend justice like today, hit subscribe now. Thank you for joining me in taking down Maxwell Carter. I hope to see you in the next video as we search for more people like him. Where justice frequently blurs, take a cue from Leavitt. Truth is the strongest weapon, and you're never alone fighting for it.